TurtleWoW has been developing content for over 6 years now to make the definitive Classic Plus experience. And in update 1.17.2 in October of 2024, they took a bold leap and overhauled every class in the game with brand new talents and abilities. After playing almost every class or playing alongside every class in a PvP or raiding environment, I have developed some extensive knowledge on which classes are performing the highest on average and which classes are performing the lowest on average. So today, I'm going to be ranking every class in TurtleWoW, with F being the lowest tier of rank they can receive and S being the highest tier of rank they can receive. I'll be measuring using a metric of overall performance, performance in various specs or utility, and design versus raid mechanics. These metrics are more weighted towards PvE, since the majority of the content being completed on TWoW is PvE focused, but we will discuss PvP performance as well. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started and look at which classes are performing the worst and which are the best. Warlocks. Player numbers do not lie, and Warlock is clearly the lowest played class. But why? Well, if you look at how they're performing in a PvE environment, it's pretty obvious. Warlock is overshadowed by the Mage as far as raw DPS, and their rotations are more difficult for them to perform. On top of that, the threat that a Warlock generates is way too high. Now, this is really important for certain fights, like the fights in AQ40 Twin Emperors, where Warlocks are literally required to be a spell tank, but without a talent to help them manage their threat outside of that responsibility, it makes them really frustrating for players to play. They can't really top the charts like they want to do. They can't pump. And if they do, they're going to wipe the raid, like, for example, on the Hagen fight in Naxxramas. Your dots are constantly ticking while the tank is running around doing the dance. And if you are unlucky enough to get a Soulfire crit while playing the fire spec, you're really going to just be hated by your raid. Maybe not hated, but people are going to be frustrated that you didn't watch your threat. And it's not entirely your fault. Some of it is just class design. Overall performance. It's very average. Now let's look at their PvP performance. Warlocks, the dot class, are often overshadowed by Shadow Priests who can do the same thing with sometimes more damage than even the Warlock because of the current burst meta on TWoW. So to rate the overall performance of Warlock, it's about a C. It's average. It's not performing at the highest. It's not performing at the lowest on the damage charts. It's just average. So it's about a C. And then performance in various specs for the Warlock is pretty abysmally low. If you go outside of the meta and try to play some of the new fire specs, you're pretty much going to pull threat whenever you open up on your rotation without special trinkets or special items to help you manage your threat, or by just stopping DPS entirely. So you're kind of stuck with SM Ruin again. And then finally, our last grading metric: how are Warlocks performing with the design of vanilla World of Warcraft? How are they performing now with these new changes? And even with the new changes, Warlocks are still performing the lowest of all classes to receive the lowest grade of all classes, which is an F. Priests. In an older era of Classic WoW, priests were the top dog of healers. They were the best. But after class overhauls on TurtleWoW, adding more Classic Plus designs, priests are performing the lowest among all of the healers. And even when they're able to do some of their new damage abilities, for example, you have new Smite priests, which are really exciting to play. It's so cool that that's been opened up, and it helps so much when you're leveling a priest to have more options rather than just playing Shadow. But when you're playing those specs, you're still outpaced. Whether you're a Smite priest or a Shadow priest, you're still going to be out-damaged by other classes, so you're still performing very average there too. So now not only are you not the greatest healer, you're also just an average damage dealer as well. Now, most raids will love you as a Shadow Priest for the utility that you bring by healing when you deal damage. So you'll still be wanted in raids. It's just not always convenient to slot a Shadow Priest into a group when you're trying to make a composition that has Wind Fury or other more desired buffs, for example, in your melee compositions. PvP is really where the priests start to shine, as the current 1-3 kill shot meta on TWoW. You can easily chastise lock and destroy a target 1v1, and you have some really impressive shadow dot damage that's really easy to apply. So with everything considered, PvP is probably the priest's strongest area of performance, but their overall performance is just D. Much of the need for hunters has kind of faded, as most guilds can burst through fights in PvE that used to require tranquilizing shot with just straight damage. Even Chromagus in my guild is being bursted through. So on top of less need for hunters and their utility being less valuable in PvE and PvP environments with the burst damage meta that exists, they're just being outpaced on average by other damage dealers, leaving them in a very average position with the exception of really geared survival hunters. But by the time you get that geared, so is everybody else, meaning you're still performing average. So their PvE design is leaving them in a very average position. However, in PvP, your hunter can really be a lot of fun, because where classic design used to kind of be a chess match of give and take, of play and counterplay, on TurtleWoW, you can just burst damage your way through any opposition. If a rogue or a warrior is getting in your face, it's not a death sentence anymore. If you're survival, you can just press a couple of buttons and kill them right away. So they're performing a lot better than they used to in PvP. Now, despite their average performance, hunters are incredibly desired because they're incredibly good at making gold. Where normally they would have been rated below average, they are more desired to play in some instances of PvE in the game because they're good at making that gold. So that's going to raise their value a little bit, but overall, their performance is still just around average, leaving them with a grade of C. Druids of old in Vanilla WoW were jacks of all trades and masters of none. They were pretty useless to bring in large quantities to your raid, and that has been completely revised. The new Classic Plus design by the TurtleWoW team has really put Druids in a top 10 contender position. They're fantastic in all roles. No matter what they choose to play, they're going to be in the top 10 if they do their rotation right. And they still carry the benefit of all their fantastic support shapeshifting buffs. Now, there are some caveats which hold the Druid back. Currently, there are so many mobs that are resistant to bleeds, immune to bleeds, which means it's more optimal to play a boomkin in many situations to try to overcome how many mobs are resistant to bleeds, because that's what feral druids use to do damage for their big rotations. And even when you're a boomkin, many mobs are still resistant to nature. So you can try to overcome with arcane, but it's going to limit your AoE damage. So because of these setbacks within the design, it makes druids get a grade of about a B. Mages were previously the most desired class in the vanilla World of Warcraft design. They were good at making gold, they were good at dealing damage, they were great at controlling tons of mobs, and even in PvP, they were pretty much one of the greatest 1v1 classes to be played. You can control any situation and reset infinitely. They were just overpowered. Let's just be honest, they were probably overpowered. And TurtleWoW has done a lot to add another viable spec for them to play. In fact, Arcane is now more viable than Frost used to be, which is really exciting, so that we can finally try out and do something useful with Arcane, which was previously just so bad you couldn't play it at all. But TurtleWoW has kind of overtuned Arcane to the point that every mage pretty much needs to be Arcane in order to deal the damage and perform the way they want to perform. So I'd say that they probably overtuned it too much in the opposite direction, even so much as reducing the ability for mages to AoE farm by using Blizzard, which was a beloved, cherished, and understood specialization for Frost mages. It was really fun to control large groups of enemies by using Blizzard, and that playstyle has kind of been eliminated, which in my opinion is a step in the wrong direction for mages. You should bring everything up and make everything more viable, not ruin one to make one more viable. But even with that setback, mage is still a very high performer. In fact, it is the highest ranking performer as far as range DPS goes on average for most guilds. In my guild, we usually on the top 10 list have every single mage on that list because their rotations are so strong. And on top of how much damage they deal, they have talents included in their talent trees in Arcane, which reduce the threat they generate meaning they can really just push as much damage as they want with very little setback. And the only time they really do too much is when they're doing AoE damage. You really have to manage that by using a lip or some sort of potion. What does this mean for mages? How are they being ranked? Well, their damage is an A tier. They are the highest range damage in the game. So they are an A grade for performance. As far as variability goes, their variable play has been reduced, and now you really only have one spec to play again as mages, except this time it's arcane. So really they get an average grade of about a C for that. Now, how are mages playing with the overall design of the game? What is their grade for the overall design of the game? Well, their grade is still very strong. However, there are some setbacks and caveats. Many mages can control most situations, but without your Blizzard to fall back on, mages are kind of left using Arcane Explosion, which unfortunately in many PvE situations will end up getting the mage killed unless they use limited invulnerability potions pretty much on cooldown whenever they're going to use an AoE ability. So their play within the design of the game is very good in single target and not as good in AoE situations, so they get about an overall grade of B. Next up is Shamans. And this was a really tough one for me because I play Shamans and I see Shamans are pretty much included in every raid and they're sought after in every raid, but that's just because I think Shamans bring the greatest support function in the game. But this isn't about how good they are as a support, it's about how good they're performing on an individual level. And individually, Shamans are probably the greatest healer in the game, but when it comes to their other specs, their variable utility, their ability to play elemental or enhancement DPS or even tanking, pretty much everybody else is going to be doing it better than you as a shaman. You're going to have a tough time competing for the top 5 spots. Pretty fair given the amount of huge utility they bring with the Wind Fury totems, with their Flame Tongue totems. But for individual performance, I'd say based on where they're in the ranking system, how many other classes are outperforming and outpacing you. I mean, usually warriors outpace you, rogues outpace you, mages are outpacing you, even warlocks in many cases, if they're playing the game right, which says a lot because they have a tough time dealing damage, are going to outpace you and your individual performance. So I'd say unfortunately on the PvE side of the house, Shamans as a DPS are performing at a pretty average level, like a C. And in the healing side of the house, they're performing at above average levels, probably an A or an S tier level. We'll probably meet in the middle on that. And then as far as their variable utility goes, they're just getting an average rating as well, because everybody can pretty much do what they're doing better. So it's a grade of C. All grades ranked up and matched together. It normally would have been an A, but you're going to be hovering around the B. And this might be the most contentious of the ratings yet, because you're going to see a ton of Shamans. Unfortunately, I think most of those Shamans are doing PvP right now, just because of how the burst meta is and how easy it is to two-shot people on a Shaman. If you look at their damage overall, that burstiness, it's very variable for Wind Fury builds, and it's a really good single target for Ellie builds, but some things are resistant to your nature damage in a raid environment, so it's really PvP where Shamans are seen the most. So to summarize, I think the overall grade, the overall tier for Shaman right now for individual performance is a B. Warriors. The best class in Classic, in my opinion, and the staple of high performers. You'd pretty much just bring all warriors to every raid with however many healers you needed and just pump to get record clear times. But how are they in the Classic Plus design? Well, they're pretty consistent, and in some cases even more enjoyable, as now you can play any spec of warrior and still be a viable player. Do you want to be an arms DPS? You can do it and still be on top of the charts. Do you want to be a Fury DPS? You know that Fury's still good, baby. Fury's still on top of the charts. Do you want to be a protection warrior who's a tanky mitigating boy? You can still do that fantastic too. In fact, all their specs are top of the line. All of the warrior specs are top performers. There are even nuanced sub-specs which are becoming kind of mainstream specs at this point, like Fury Prot, which perform incredibly high. Even the Arms Prot is performing incredibly high. Warriors are just fantastic all around. TurtleWoW did not disappoint with warriors by taking the original good design and making it so that more of their talents are viable. I rank the Giga Chad class with an overall performance grade of A. There is a very clear reason to me as to why the Paladin is performing higher than all other classes, and that every specialization of Paladin is a top performer, and that Paladins are greater at gold farming than any other class right now. They are just the greatest in all categories, and considering the upcoming changes to PvP in 1.18.0, Paladins are slotted or appear to be set up to be the greatest in the PvP arena compositions as well if they're reducing damage. Paladins are just top tier, and their gearing, their itemization is no exception. Their tier 1 gear is itemized better than anyone else's, their tier 2 is itemized better than anyone else's, and their tier 3 is itemized better than anyone else's for all specs. Now, the other classes catch up in the tier 3 category and start to be itemized better, but it doesn't change the fact that all of their other gear is itemized so well. This is because the developers are playing Paladins, I think, more than other classes, and that's pretty obvious, and that's okay, because you want your developers to play your game. It's similar to what happened when Ghostcrawler was one of the devs of the older team was playing Forsaken Rogue. Rogues became kind of busted in Classic and had like over 30 seconds of stun. You know, back in the day, Rogues were kind of OP in a lot of the 1v1 situations because the developers were playing the game. But let's talk about some of the reasons why Paladins are performing so high. Individual performance. Spell Ret Paladins have an incredible amount of trash AoE DPS. Now, the melee Ret builds are not performing as high, but the spell ret builds are literally on top of the damage charts in almost every situation. And then you have your tanks. Paladin tanks are irreplaceable and super important because that AoE threat on multiple mobs is one of the most important things you can have in a raiding environment to protect your healers and protect your team. And this snap threat is just insane as well. I mean, there are some situations where even your snap threat is top tier. Their damage is top tier, their tanking is top tier, and even in their healing department, a lot of our shaman healers are being outperformed due to group compositions because Paladins can stack Daybreak and then Restoration Druids 20% heal shapeshifting buff together to get like a almost plus 50% to their heals. And on top of that, Paladin healers have almost infinite mana compared to the other healers. Their sustain is just much higher with a lot of critical hit built in. They're just excellent tank healers. They can adapt and kind of raid heal. They have life-saving abilities with their bubbles and even Hand of Sacrifice. They're just incredibly good. They cannot be beat. They are an S tier class on TurtleWoW, the best of the best. Player numbers don't lie. Again, if you look at how many players are playing Paladins in PvP, in PvE environments, they take the cake. They are S tier. Aren't you forgetting a class? You know, one of the most important classes of all time, maybe. Nope. Been playing this game a long time. I know all the classes by now. One of them wouldn't slip past me. And of course, who could forget the Rogue? Now, a Rogue of a previous age was basically just a worse warrior. In fact, you should probably just roll a warrior because you're doing damage with your swords like a warrior would. And you're not really doing anything that a rogue should be doing anyway. But in the Classic Plus design, now in TurtleWoW, you're basically a warrior wearing leather, but you do top tier damage, so that's really important. And what happened to subtlety? Oh, it's destroyed. It's completely redone. Oh, okay. So there's no more PvP spec for rogue. Okay, got it. But at least they do top tier damage. And let me tell you, they are a top performer. All of our rogues are on the top charts, and even our support build rogues, which should have been subtlety, and actually it's the improved exposed armor build, are still top performers. Their contribution is huge to the overall damage metric. So rogues are fantastic. They perform very high with the exception of their variability. You can only really use the rogue one way in every situation, and that includes in PvP. You can't really play the sneaky rogue you want to play. You kind of just need to play a sneaky warrior. I mean, sneak up to your enemy, basically, and then smack him with your swords like you're a warrior without charge, or maybe a more tactical warrior. So, all things considered, I give the rogue a tier rating of B. What do you think? Do you think there are classes that should have been higher or lower on this tier list? Do you think maybe the player numbers are reflecting something different than what I said in this current video about TurtleWoW? Let me know in the comment section. And as always, I appreciate you liking, subscribing. Thank you to everyone in this community who has made it grow so large. I really appreciate everything you do for this community. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next video.